coastal city of Mombasa, Kenya's second largest city, was a favorite holiday destination for Jomo Kenyatta. Countless times he retreated to this city on what the official presidential press service often inaccurately referred to as a working holiday. On the morning that he passed on peacefully in his sleep in Mombasa, Simon Mwangi Wambogo was the police officer on duty at the communication operation room at the police headquarters in Nairobi.
I got another call from Mombasa, either from Mahehu or from Mathu. And this one required me to dispatch one Air Force Karibu. And that should be flown by none other but the Air Force commander, Kanogi Churu then. We were connected with Churu with a radio telephone to his house. So I also called him. And the first thing he asked me, because Gichuru was once my boss, he asked me, what is your rank, by the way? I said, I'm an inspector. Since when did the inspectors give orders to colonels? He said, sir, I'm not ordering you, I'm saying, I'm relaying message from State House, Mombasa. The Karibu must fly to Mombasa, and you should be the pilot. At around 6:30, I got another call, this time from Mahehu, from Hinga. And he says, can you order all the provinces to lower the national flag and the police flag half-mast? And I did that. For me, it's just to call every province. And when I call the PPU in each province, what he does down there, it was his business. So that was done. And then I was beginning to receive calls now from State House. Karaidi was already there. And he says, cabinet meeting should be due any time. It should be there like now, and I want the cabinet here.
Simeon Nyachae was at the time the provincial commissioner in charge of Central Province, that includes Gatundu, the native home of the late president.
The main purpose of giving me the message first was to ensure that all the government machinery in Central Province were given that information very quietly, because the moment the news came out through the media, a lot of people in Central Province will be asking questions, what has happened and that kind of thing.
But the one person we hadn't found is the Vice President, Daniel Moi. And when I became completely frustrated, it became necessary for me to talk to the province. They didn't know how to reach him. I went down to the OCPD Baringo, and OCPD Baringo could not raise him. And we were not able to raise him even using the radio system in his escort vehicles. When the OCPD went physically to look for him, at about 8:30, he was told that Moi had left with his convoy of security detail, heading outwards instead of coming to Nairobi. Because Mahehu had informed me that he had talked to Moi himself and had informed him that the president has died. So when OCPD told me that, I told him, follow the way he followed until you catch up with him and make him come to Nairobi, because it's the only reason why the cabinet meeting will not take place.
I drove to the Vice President's house. That was the Honorable Daniel Arap Moi. He had also arrived from Nakuru. I had a short discussion with him, and he was also waiting for various formalities to be arranged. While I was there, the commandant of the GSU came with, I think, almost a platoon of his people, and put up the tents around the home of the Vice President. This is just a security precaution that once the news comes out, you don't know the reaction of various people. And there was need now for the potential successor to be given adequate security.
Despite failing health and his advanced age, estimated at beyond 90 years at the time, the death of Jomo Kenyatta caught many Kenyans by surprise, including some key members of his powerful
For Kenyans and the country I love most, peace and prosperity.
Daniel Arap Moi was born on September 2nd, 1924 in Sacho, Baringo district in the expansive Rift Valley. Moi lost his father, Kemoi Chabi, at a very tender age and was brought up single-handedly by his mother. At the age of 10, Moi joined the African Inland Mission School in Kabartonjo before joining Sacho High School. Born Toroitich Arap Moi, he took the name Daniel when he was baptized at the mission school. He then enrolled at Tambach Teachers College, where he trained as a teacher. Moi then went on to start a career as a teacher at the government school in Kabarnet, where he rose to the level of headmaster. However, his teaching career was rather short as he quit in 1955 to join politics. As a staunch Christian, it is believed that his decision to swap the classroom for politics came after interacting with a group of freedom fighters who were hiding from colonial forces. He is reported to have hosted the freedom fighters for 2 weeks. Sometime in 1950, Moi married a young woman named Helena Bomet, who later came to be known simply as Lena Moi. Over the years, the couple were blessed with 8 children, 3 girls, Jennifer, Doris, and June, as well as 5 boys, Jonathan, Raymond, John Mark, Philip, and Gideon. Moi's political star quickly rose and he was immediately elected member of the Legislative Council, LegCo, to represent his Rift Valley province, and 2 years later, he was re-elected.
He was mishandled in Nakuru, and he disliked that kind of thing. But that did not stop him from admiring the great values of what the British had, for instance. And that is why I think they refer to him as an Anglophile, someone who really admired the English way of doing things, the gentlemanly things that the English did.
In 1960, Moi joined another young politician from the coast, Ronald Ngala, and together they formed a political party, the Kenya African Development Union, KADU, ostensibly to challenge Jomo Kenyatta's Kenya African National Union, KANU, which was seen to represent the interests of the bigger communities, notably the Kikuyu and the Luo. On Kenya's independence in 1963, founding President Mzee Jomo Kenyatta noticed Daniel Arap Moi's growing influence in the young nation's political scene. Kenya then effectively became a one-party state with KANU as the ruling party. Kenyatta's vice president was Jaramogi Oginga Odinga.
Wakati ya Mzee Kenyatta, najua sasa wakati waliondoa hiyo hali ya multivati ya KATU na KANU, so ikawa na chama moja. Iliweza tu kucontrol na watu wakasikiza. Kwanza serikali ilikuwa ni mpya. Pili, watu walikuwa wamefinywa na wazungu mpaka sasa watu na wanaona sasa wameokolewa.
In 1966 came a political event that was to change the political course of Kenya for many years to come. Kenyatta differed with his vice president, Oginga Odinga, who went on to form his own political party, the Kenya People's Union. Jomo then appointed Joseph Murumbi as vice president, a rather short stint, as Murumbi resigned a short while later.
He goes for Joe Murumbi. Joe Murumbi is a bit, you cannot say he's Luo, he's Kikuyu. No, he is Goan, so you cannot pigeonhole him into a community. He is less assertive, therefore gives the founding president room to assert himself.
By then, Jomo Kenyatta had turned his political compass towards the Rift Valley, and Moi was perfectly placed. The VP's office remained vacant for 3 months as Jomo Kenyatta carefully pondered his
No, I don't think you should waste your time discussing petty things. Think of what this alliance wants to achieve and focus on that problem. What do they want to achieve? And you want to achieve an agreement between very many parties, between some civil society groups and everybody else on how they will work in the next election. Now that's the most important issue. Personally, what name we call ourselves is neither here nor there.
Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki, the gentleman of Kenyan politics, described by admirers as a great statesman, a shrewd politician and an astute economist, and credited with key decisions that helped shape the foundations of the Kenyan nation state.
Any good things that need to be said about a person should be said about Kibaki. He was just a remarkable person, a person who got along with everybody, irrespective of the station in life.
I was privileged to work with a real gentleman. Kibaki would never entertain fitina. No. So if we gave you work to do, he expected you to do the work.
I remember him as a leader who was committed to doing the best he could for Kenyans, a person who was professional in the way he conducted business and government, a great debater in Parliament, a great contributor, and the Hansard would bear me right.
Time magazine, as early as when he was just an assistant minister, Times magazine said that Kibaki will be the future leader of Kenya. And he was very young. He was in his early 30s.
An unlikely hero, Kibaki rose from a small village called Gatuyain in present-day Nyeri County to become one of Kenya's most consequential leaders.
What we need as Kenyans, and the action we want to see, is government showing that it is serious, that it means to actually root out corruption. And there will be no way of rooting out corruption until you can have an anti-corruption authority which is able to prosecute people without reference to the Attorney General. In other words, without reference to clearance by government.
In a political career spanning well over half a century, Kibaki is credited for his part in penning the famous sessional paper number 10 of 1965 to put in motion the social and economic evolution of a then young nation. A document that would guide Kenya's economic philosophy for decades.
He was one of the promulgators, if you like, of the sessional paper number 10 of 1965 in his capacity as economist, along with the late Tom Mboya at that time, which was a very important document in terms of giving a philosophical approach to developing this country.
African socialism and its application in the development of Kenya. That was the first document to define where Kenya was going. He actually wrote it himself. But of course, it's today known as a book written by Tom Mboya. Tom Mboya, in fact, commissioned it because when Kibaki went to Commerce and Industry, Jomo Kenyatta created, President Kenyatta created a Ministry of Planning and National Development. Was split from the Treasury. And the first minister for that ministry was Tom Mboya. So Tom Mboya inaugurated that book.
Mwai Kibaki is one of the people who founded the foundation or the stability that we really ride on up to now, because they came up with a very good blueprint of mixed economy, not revolutionary, but pragmatic economic blueprint, which brought in investors, which allowed private sector development in the country, and which really empowered the business in this country.
Before assuming power in 2002, Mwai Kibaki had served in the government of the founding president, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, navigating the delicate Kenyatta succession battles to serve in second president Daniel Arap Moi's administration, largely as a finance minister and vice president, before going into opposition at the onset of multipartyism in 1991.
Kibaki was, I think, forced into the opposition by circumstances. I think at that time, you know, the style of governance changed quite a lot after the attempted coup of 1982. That changed the style of governance, because the then president was more focusing on security of the state rather than probably tapping the best brains available. So loyalty became the number one thing. And if anybody expressed a different opinion, there was a lot of sensitivity, which caused sometimes misinterpretation. And Kibaki started finding his room of operation quite narrowed. The space, you know, as Minister of Finance, a Vice President, you need to have a broad space. But because of that sensitivity, the space of operation became quite narrow.
I found in him a very eloquent debater. He was Vice President then, and he was the leader of government business in the House. We used to then have serious debaters in the House. And President Kibaki one time famously said that even rigging requires some intelligence. That was because of the Mlolongo system, which tried to dislodge him as MP for Thaya. It could not work.
I came into Parliament in December 1992 in the Democratic Party, which he led, and I was in the opposition benches with him as my leader for 10 years, until 2002 when we went to government and he appointed me Minister of Water, later Minister for Justice, until I resigned on principle in April 2009. And to that extent, my political career is very much tied to his, and I can say I'm one of those people who learned at his feet to always do your best for your country.
In the run-up to the 2002 general election, at the tail end of the Moi era, Raila Odinga, who had teamed up with KANU earlier in the year, would lead a host of cabinet ministers out of the grand old party to join up with the budding opposition alliance, then led by Kibaki. The Raila faction had by now formed itself into a political party, the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP.
Na Mheshimiwa Joyce Saitoti, na Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka, na Mheshimiwa Mudi Awori, sisi tuko katika National Council ya chama cha LDP.
Leading to the formation of the National Rainbow Coalition, NAC, a political juggernaut
pronounced it in a Kamba accent, but what the colonizer heard was Kinya. And from this conversation, the name of our nation, Kenya, was born 200 years ago. Kirinyaga County is therefore at the heart of a very rich heritage as a nation. The development of the then Kirinyaga district, created out of the western part of Embu district in 1963, has closely mirrored that of the wider country, culminating with the advent of devolution. The 20th of October is a significant date in our history because in 1952, this was the day that a state of emergency was declared on our land by the colonizers, and hundreds of our founding fathers were arrested. But when our founding fathers, led by the likes of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Paul Ngei, Masinde Muliro, amongst others, overcame the darkness of the emergency period, a new order emerged. They had a three-point agenda that resonates to date. They declared war on ignorance, poverty, and disease. And today that war is still on. It is a war we have inherited, and a war that shall also bestow on future generations. The commitment, as declared by our forefathers, is a sacred obligation today, and it is so from one generation to the next. Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, representing the founding fathers, had this to say on the task at hand. And he said, and I quote, that our children will learn about the heroes of the past, but our task is to make ourselves the architects of the future. This is a challenge he posed not only to his generation, but to all Kenyan generations to come. Each generation must not focus only on past heroism, but it must also continuously strive to be the architects of their own brighter future. For us to become architects of the future, we must begin by protecting what was left behind to us by the heroes who liberated this country, and in particular, we were charged with a great responsibility of taking care of our territorial integrity. Since the dawn of our republic, on many occasions, we have experienced territorial aggressions to the sanctity of our borders. Some have been driven from within and others from without. But the message of our founding fathers to these aggressors was simple: not an inch less, not an inch more. And this is the message that must reverberate across the collective quarters that are bent on annexing any part of the territory known as the Republic of Kenya. The resolve of our founding fathers rings as true today as it did then. Not an inch less, not an inch more. And we as Kenyans say this because we are a nation content with our country's bounty and also content with the splendor within our borders. So, fellow Kenyans, the transformation of our security sector has without doubt been one of the most significant endeavors of my administration. We continue to add new arrows in the quiver of our national security by retooling the resources and capacity of our security agencies. This visible transformation of our security organs has been done in honor of their national duty of defending our sovereignty, maintaining our territorial integrity, securing our borders, and preserving our cherished freedoms and our way of life. As an affirmation of this, today, Kenya's police-to-population ratio is at its highest level in our history and is higher than the UN prescribed standard. Similarly, in the last 8 years, we have undertaken the most consequential and expansive modernization of our military in our nation's history. We continue to tool and to retool our security resources to the highest standards in order to keep our people safe and secure and to preserve our territorial integrity in a just, fair, democratic, and safe country for all. But aside to this, we have also invested in the welfare of those charged with our security personnel, which include a review of their remuneration, benefits, and other allowances, upgrading of housing, provision of insurance, and increasing the capacity of the health facilities used by our security personnel. In addition to what we have already done, we are also building an additional 4 hospitals to cater for them and their dependents in recognition of the heavy toll placed on them and their families. Fellow Kenyans, ladies and gentlemen, now I must return to the subject of being architects of the future. When our founding fathers charged us with this task, what they told us is that the future is not a destination out there waiting for us. It is a destination that we create, block by block. It is like an open book that you write, page by page, moment by moment. But you do not realize it until you are met by unexpected challenges. Challenges like COVID-19. And then all of a sudden, you are placed upon the horns of a dilemma. You can either choose to see obstacles in every opportunity or opportunity in every obstacle. This, fellow Kenyans, is the foundation of any successful nation state. It is about choices. Yet, it is in moments like this that the true character of a nation and a people is revealed. I am proud to say that with the COVID-19 crisis, our state of mind as a government has been one of finding opportunities in every problem occasioned by COVID. Instead of focusing on what is, we have focused on what could be. And this optimism by government, coupled with a basket of stimulus instruments, is what has thrust our economy into rapid recovery, while the global economy, we all know, contracted by an average of 3.6% last year. We managed to grow our economy by 0.3% over the same period, and this year it is projected to grow by 6% despite the ravages of COVID. In recognition of the extraordinary and exceptional nature of the pandemic, the government, as the guarantor for enjoyment of social economic rights, issued targeted responses to the pandemic to cushion Kenyans against the effects of the pandemic. My administration made various policy interventions with a view of putting money in the pockets of Kenyans. This included various tax reliefs, an 8-point stimulus program of some Kenya shillings 56.8 billion, and Kazi Mtaani to cushion our youth from COVID-related unemployment and other vulnerabilities. Today, this economic rebound is also reflected in the strong revenue performance, as at the end of September 2021, with the ordinary revenue of our country having increased by some 26.8%. There are many indicators which demonstrate how we took advantage of the opportunities and the problems presented to us by COVID-19, and we shall be elaborating further during our scheduled State of the Nation address in Parliament. But just to name a few examples, for instance, the management of the Kenya Meat Commission was replaced during the thick fog of COVID-19. The Department of Defense took 1 year to refurbish the commission and reopened it in April of this year. I am happy to note that in the 6 months, KMC got out of debt and increased the number of head of cattle processed a day from 8 to 185, 23 times what the old KMC used to process. Today, KMC is paying farmers within 72 hours for livestock delivered at a rate of Kenya shillings 185 per kilo for cattle. In fact, the previous commission had paid a total of Kenya shillings 52 million to farmers between the months of April to September 2020. By comparison, the new management of KMC that reopened the plant in April of 2021 has to date, in those short period, paid out a total of Kenya shillings 643 million, representing an increment of over 1,200%. Another area of transformation under the COVID duress is the tea sector. And the story of our tea sector is one that must be told. This sector has been the predatory grounds for cartels for many decades. But it has now been liberated, and its performance has started to improve. On account of the reform measures implemented by my administration, the price of Kenyan tea has increased by 42% in the last 1 year alone, and the minimum auction price of tea now stands at $3 per kilo, the highest price on record for the last 5 years. Indeed, it is expected that our tea farmers will receive a healthy bonus at the end of June 2022, signaling a return to the good old days of Chai Bora, Pesa Bora. In the coffee sector, again, I am pleased to report that the determined efforts of our government to root out corrupt cooperatives that have been predating on our coffee farmers have borne fruit. The revitalization of the new KPCU by government has brought healthy competition into the coffee milling activities. And as a result, farmers in high-yielding areas like here in Kirinyaga are now receiving upward of Kenya shillings 100 per kilogram for their coffee, up from the average Kenya shillings 25 per kilogram in 2019. Milk production is another area, and as part of our efforts to ensure a reasonable rate of return for our dairy farmers, my government introduced a pricing guideline, and this has seen farm gate prices increase from Kenya shillings 27 per litre in January of 2020 to a high of Kenya shillings 40 per litre as of September 2021. On rice, I did, when I visited Kirinyaga last, direct that the Kenya National Trading Corporation purchase all the rice, not only from Ware, but also from Kano Plains, for onward selling to our disciplined forces, prison services, as well as to our boarding schools. And I am pleased to confirm that last year, out of 6 rice cooperatives nationally, Mwea Rice Growers Cooperative sold the most bags of rice to government. And in fact, for every 10 bags sold to government, Kirinyaga farmers sold 7. And out of this, they realized a total revenue of over 1 billion Kenya shillings. And in order to promote our rice farmers, I did direct the Ministry of Agriculture to secure the continued purchase of the upcoming crop so that we can maintain and continue this transformation. But ladies and gentlemen, it is the transformation of our health sector that is probably the most phenomenal testimonies of how we transformed COVID obstacles into opportunities that expanded our health facilities. In Nairobi alone, we have constructed over the period and operationalized 15 level 2 and 3 hospitals in various informal settlements through the Nairobi Metropolitan Service. And there are another 15 currently under construction. One of the unintended benefits of the pandemic is that we have increased, as a country, our ICU capacity by an impressive 502%, from 180 to 651 ICU-ready beds across the country. And similarly, our total hospital bed capacity as a country has increased by 47%, from 56,069 in the year 2013 to the current figure of 82,291 hospital beds spread throughout the country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have improved our oxygen generation capacity in all our public health facilities, from 3 million liters per day in March of 2020 to 32 million liters per day in October of 2021. We have further increased the number of reference laboratories that can test for notifiable diseases of international concern and public health importance, from one single laboratory in March of 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic to what we have today, which stands at 95. Fellow Kenyans, I just wish to remind you that at the beginning of the pandemic last year, we used to ship our samples for testing in South Africa, and the result turnaround time would be anything up to 5 days onwards. Today, we have our own capacity. These strategic diagnostic investments have strengthened the country's healthcare system, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and will propel us faster towards the attainment of universal health coverage and fortify our country's preparedness for future global health security challenges. The health workforce is a key pillar of every healthcare system, yet many times it turns out to be the weakest link, typically seen as a cost driver instead of an area for public and private investment in health service provision. In a bid to bridge the gap in human resources for health, the government has progressively recruited an additional 36,900 healthcare workers in the last 9 years, bringing total public health workforce to what it is today, 75,000 health workers. The mid-level healthcare worker plays a critical part and role in the health service delivery throughout all levels of care, specifically at the primary care level. And to this extent, we have expanded the capacity of our medical training colleges to train this critical mass of health experts from 28 KMTC campuses in 2013 to the current 71 campuses spread across 44 of our 47 counties. My administration has also put in place a comprehensive nationwide program to upgrade selected hospitals in all the 47 counties through provision of specialized modern state-of-the-art medical, diagnostic, and critical care equipment. Through the Managed Equipment Services project, whose objective was to improve access to quality specialized healthcare services throughout our country. Under this project, we have identified and equipped 115 hospitals with various theater equipment, 101 hospitals with various radiological and imaging equipment, 14 facilities with ICU equipment, and 54 facilities installed and commissioned renal equipment for dialysis. Through this massive investment, 628,000 people have benefited from theater services.
Areas prone to landslides and mudslides in various counties have been identified as high-risk areas from which the adjacent settlements have to be evacuated. Third, relocation notices have been issued to all persons living in unplanned settlements within riparian reserves along rivers, streams, and other water courses. Acknowledging the gravity of this unfolding situation, the Cabinet has met 3 times over the last 10 days to provide leadership on a whole-of-government response to this crisis. To support disaster response and mitigation efforts across the country, the Treasury has been directed to provide adequate resources and work with other development partners to provide for the purchase and supply of food, medical, and other non-food items. County security committees are directed to determine on a case-by-case basis the radius that shall constitute the scope of the area subject to evacuation and mandatory relocation that has already been pronounced. The county security committees are further directed to continuously monitor other dams and water reservoirs across the country that may not be presenting a risk now, but could do so in the event of further precipitation. The Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police are directed to deploy resources, personnel, and equipment for carrying out coordinated public safety and risk mitigation operations in as many parts of the country as they have installations. Security agencies are further directed to enlist the support of the National Youth Service and work with the National Government Administration officers to respond to this emergency, including ensuring timely, orderly, and human evacuation of all persons at risk. Cabinet secretaries will spearhead disaster response and mitigation efforts across the country, and to this end, ministries, departments, and agencies are directed to work closely with the National Disaster Operations Center and security agencies to ensure the whole of government approach to the management of the prevailing crisis. The government, working with stakeholders, has put in place adequate measures to provide temporary shelter, as well as food and non-food essential supplies. The ministry responsible for special programs is directed to work with development partners and relevant humanitarian organizations to mobilize adequate food and non-food supplies to support all affected persons in every part of the country. The Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, through the National Cereals and Produce Board, is directed to make available food supplies in government stores to support this effort. The Ministry of Health is directed to work with development partners, including the World Health Organization, AMREF, Red Cross, UNHCR, World Food Programme, and other relevant humanitarian agencies to mobilize resources and logistical support to avail essential drugs, food, and other medical supplies to those affected. The Ministry of Interior is directed to coordinate the relocation and evacuation of the affected members of the public, identification of sites for temporary shelter for displaced persons, and supervise the overall support program. The Ministry of Education is directed to postpone the dates of reopening of all schools in the country for the second term until further notice. Members of Parliament are requested to reorganize the CDF allocations to prioritize reconstruction of school infrastructure that has been damaged as a result of the floods ravaging the country. As the national government plays its role in dealing with the current situation, I request and urge county governments, development partners, and private sector to join in these efforts and provide support as, where, and when they can. In Nairobi, settlements in riparian reserves have complicated the response efforts and compounded and aggravated the risk to human life, safety, and property destruction. The Ministry of Interior is hereby directed to enforce the relocation notices issued earlier upon their expiry at 6:30 p.m. today. We appreciate and thank members of the public who are already cooperating with government on the evacuation and relocation effort that is underway. I want to mention specifically citizens in different parts. I saw, for example, in Dandora, citizens themselves volunteering, removing their structures, carrying their wares, carrying their furniture, and looking for places to store them. It is an encouraging development that citizens are part of the solution and they are participating in the evacuation and relocation efforts. Further, the government appreciates the goodwill demonstrated by thousands of individuals and institutions, volunteers, and others who have made tremendous input into alleviating the suffering and pain by those affected by the prevailing crisis. In the same spirit, the public is called upon to respect and adhere to safety alerts and interventions and to cease and desist from risking their lives or the lives of others by daring the force of nature. Kenyans must avoid endangering their lives by recklessly attempting to cross flooded rivers or drive on waterlogged roads. I extend my gratitude to the media for their commitment to contribute airtime worth Kenya shillings 100 million to support response to this crisis. The measures we are taking at present are aimed at responding to the current crisis in the immediate and the short term. For us to comprehensively address such a threat in the long term, we have to acknowledge and act to reverse the adverse effects of climate change. The current unprecedented crisis of floods that our country is experiencing, as well as the recent devastating drought our country faced, the worst in 40 years after 5 consecutive failed rains, is a direct consequence of our failure to protect our environment, resulting in painful effects of climate change as we are witnessing today. Our country will remain in this cyclical crisis for a long time unless and until we confront the existential threat of climate change. Our climate